Hello, my name is Mr. Roose, and I am a naturalist here at Hartley Outdoor Education Center here in St. Charles, Michigan, and today we're going to talk about lumberjacking. What the lumberjacks were actually looking for was a tree called the white pine tree, and here we have some examples right here on the Hartley property. They called it green gold because a lot of money was made cutting the lumber from white pine trees down. Now, how do you identify a white pine tree? Well, it's actually fairly easy. You pull off a branch from the white pine tree, find a bunch of needles, pull those off, and once you separate them, you'll see that it has 5 needles in a bunch. And it actually spells its name, W-H-I-T-E. And so also, when you bend the needles, you can actually see they'll spring back instead of breaking. So that's how you can identify a white pine tree. And so what season of the year do you think they started to do the cutting of the trees? Spring, summer, winter, or fall? Well, if you guessed winter, you're correct. Why? Because there's a couple reasons. One, because it's not so hot. If you were trying to cut trees down in the summertime, you'd be sweating and all hot. In the winter, you want to stay warm. So the more you do, the warmer you are. Also, there's no bugs in the wintertime. The bugs are only out in the summer and other seasons. So that was a lot better to cut trees in the wintertime. And lastly, it was easier to move the logs around with sleds, and that they would just make ice roads and pile big, huge logs on these sleds and be able to move them around over the ice, and it made it a lot easier. All right, I have something I want to show you inside. All right, here we actually have an actual sled right here. The logs would get loaded in and then pulled usually by a team of horses, or actually a couple horses, because they were so easy to move around on the ice that they only needed a couple horses to do it. Here we have a photograph from 1880, and you can see how huge these logs were that they were moving around. Now, besides the log sled moving logs around, they actually used a couple tools also. This right here is called a cant hook, and they would hook that underneath the log and be able to roll it to where they wanted it to go. They could also move it by using skidding tongs. These would be attached by a chain to the mule or a horse, and those would go on the end of logs and be able to pull them along to where they wanted to go. And where they wanted to go was the banks of the river, and they piled them all there at the same time because everybody had cut all their logs during the winter time and piled the logs on the banks. And when the ice melts, that's when everybody piled all their logs into the river because it had to go down to the sawmill. Now, once everybody piles all their logs into the river at the same time, then sometimes a log jam would happen. And this guy had to be brave and strong to go out to where the logs are all jammed up and push and pull with the pike pole. That's what this is called. And then he would have to, after he unjammed the logs, have to get off of the river by throwing and using the little caulks in his boot to keep them from slipping off. Now, once it got down to the sawmills had to identify whose logs is who. And so that's what this is right here. This is an actual log end from a tree, and it actually has a log mark in it. There would be a guy with a giant log hammer, and he would stand on the ends of the logs and hammer in all the log mark from his company. And once it got to the sawmill could put their pile of logs in one place, another company's in another place, and that's how they could identify the logs. After the timber cruisers found a stand of white pine trees to cut down, then they used a two-person, two-handed crosscut saw to do the job. These trees were huge, so they had huge saws to do it. There's actually cutters and rakers. The cutters would cut the log, and the rakers raked the sawdust out. All right, obviously we cut a small tree down with the crosscut saw, and it's hard to see the rings on this tree, but you can actually go to a stump like this and look at the rings and be able to count those and figure out how old the tree is. So go in your yard and see if you can find a stump somewhere and see if you can count the rings on a tree. Now, the importance of white pine tree to not only Michigan, but in other places of the country, were this cabin, for example, was made from white pine trees, and the white pine trees of Michigan, which were almost all cut down, were used to rebuild Chicago. All right, so this is what I want you to do at your home, is go out and find a nice white pine tree. Remember to do the white pine find and pull off a bunch of needles. Count the needles, W-H-I-T-E, to find a white pine tree. Remember to bend them, that way it proves it's a white pine tree. And also, maybe this summer when things open up again, the campgrounds, there's a great park up north called Hartwick Pine State Park, where you can find original white pine trees that were never cut down, in one of the few places in the entire state to see these white pine trees that were never cut down. Well, I hope you learned a few things. I hope you're staying safe, and have a great day, and I'll see you when you come out to Hartley maybe next year. Bye-bye.